Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Ellen Fanning, broadcasting today from Geelong in Victoria, a city that's gone from the brink to a boom in under a decade. The population's rising and housing prices are too. While we're here today, we'll talk about the big building spend in this area, including this magnificent building, the Dome, Geelong's library and heritage centre. We'll talk about an innovative new plan to deal with the housing crisis. And as Geelong is the headquarters for the NDIS, Labor's plan to refocus the National Disability Insurance Scheme announced earlier today. Joining me on the panel, lead economist at Impact Economics and Policy and former senior Labor staffer, Angela Jackson. Great to see you. Deputy Mayor of the City of Greater Geelong Council and Liberal Party member Trent Sullivan. Welcome to television. I'm sure you've been on before, but welcome to national television. Meeting for the first time, we've spoken to each other a lot on air, Director of Murrup Barrack, Melbourne Institute for Indigenous Development, Inala Cooper, in the flesh. Great to see you.
You too, Ellen.
And I'm very excited to meet the owner of Bellarine Smokehouse, Sarah Fenton. You are living my life. You are living my dream. And you can join us on Twitter using the hashtag #TheDrum, and we're on Facebook. We are in the electorate of Corio, held by Labor's Deputy Leader Richard Marles since 2007. But just next door is Corangamite, a seat which has changed hands a lot in recent elections and was won at the last election by Labor from the Liberals' Sarah Henderson. So what might a place like this have to tell us about the state of politics and what voters are looking for in this election? Now, Sarah, let's go first to you. You are from Corangamite, which is one of those very marginal electorates that may well decide this election. So your vote really, really counts.
Yep.
What are your views on the campaign so far?
Look, I think they're a bit lost. I don't think there's a lot of trust. There's not from me, there's not from the people that I swim with every day, my swimming group, the Salty Bitches, from my Pilates group, from everyone. There's not a lot of trust in what's going on, whether it's from the Liberal or Labor Party. Although we know how important our vote is down here. And it's hard. It's hard because I don't think without that trust, and with the last 2 years as a small business owner, there are things that the federal government hasn't done and have done that have impacted severely on this region.
And at the same time, Inala, the AEC was blown away yesterday. 214,000 Australians registered to vote, which was a record number in one day. What does that tell us, do you think?
I think it tells us that people really want to have their say. They want to ensure that the priorities they have are reflected in their vote, and I think it's a terrific number. And hopefully that's a lot of first-time voters, 18-year-olds or students or folks who might be voting for the first time, who have decided, I want my priorities to be put down on the ballot paper and have my voice heard.
It's not ho-hum. They're not ho-hum numbers. Gosh, another jaded election campaign. That's engagement.
Absolutely. And I wonder, I think the way in which the media and social media is being used throughout an election campaign may have a lot to do with that. Different people are engaged in different ways with social media, but being on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, a lot of people go to those social media platforms to get their news in the first instance. So that may have a lot to do with it as well. But I agree with Sarah. I think people are a bit fed up. There is a bit of a loss of trust, and it'll be interesting come election day.
Trent, thanks so much for being with us. You are the acting mayor here.
Yes, at the moment.
Because the mayor is running for the Liberal Party in Corio, safe Labor seat.
Corangamite.
Yes. Corangamite. So tell me, you grew up here in Geelong, single mum, and here you are in an influential role on council. Why politics? Why do you think it can make a difference to the world?
Why politics? Well, politics, like government, like any sort of form of advocacy, is people who are passionate. They think you can make a difference. You know, we all live in communities wherever we are, and when you look around you, you see the people around you. It's always good to be involved, and especially at a grassroots level, local government embodies that. And we see what's going on, you sort of think, hang on, these are things that are important to me. These are things I'm seeing that are important to the people around me. I believe everyone should be able to stand up, no matter what your point of view is, no matter where you're coming in politics. The more voices we have, the absolute better it is, no matter the issue at all. So that's sort of what inspired me. I said I grew up under a single mother who was just an absolute leader in my life, and I see the example that she set.
Yeah.
Gave me the opportunity to say, you know what, I actually can put my hand up myself as well. I can actually get out there and, chase what I believe in. So that's, the reason why I believe here I am now in the City of Greater Geelong.
Yeah, good on you. And Angela, this is interesting as an election because a lot of people are voting in different places this time. There've been a lot of sea changes, a lot of people moved to regional areas. And we're going to talk tonight about the growing pains and the ways in which that changes what issues are important to people. Do you see that as an economist?
Oh, look, definitely. And it's one of the stories of the pandemic, isn't it? We stopped having international migration, but we actually saw a lot of Australians leaving the major cities and moving to regional areas just like Geelong and Corangamite. That's been a benefit for these regions. And in fact, if you look at the Geelong region, employment's up over 10% since the start of the pandemic. It's been boom time, if you like, for some of these regions. But the growing pains are there. We've seen rents in this region go up by over 20% in 12 months. Now, that is huge if you think you're spending, 30, 40% of your income on rents if they're going up by 20%. So there's certainly growing pains. And then there's also the services of obviously those people rely on. So are there the childcare services? Are there the disability services, the aged services, as well as the roads, which often gets a focus? Is that social infrastructure there? And how does that impact both the people moving to the region, but also those that are already here? So I think certainly you're going to see in this election a lot of those factors coming out in terms of, yes, there's jobs, but do we have the services we need to support these economies?
Around here they call it not a sea change but a G change. Victoria's second largest city, Geelong, has been growing for years and the pandemic gave it an extra push. The Geelong region and its neighbouring Surf Coast and the Bellarine Peninsula are Victoria's top three fastest growing population centres. And like any regional commuter city, the changing population here in Geelong is contributing to those growing pains. The Drum's Stephanie Bolchi explains.
The people of this once great city are rising and saying, no more. No more will we be forgotten.
This controversial tourism ad in 2014 claimed the city was coming back from the dead. But the celebrity mayor at the centre of it was later sacked from the top job, along with the council. The ad came just months after hundreds of people were laid off from Alcoa's aluminium smelter and mills.
It was the end of the line today for the Alcoa aluminium works at Point Henry near Geelong.
And in 2016, Ford officially shut its local factory after 91 years of operation.
It's the end of an era for Australian car manufacturing. The final Australian-made Ford rolled off the production line today.
I have seen a lot of changes, new buildings, all that sort of thing, a lot of housing happening on the outskirts of Geelong.
It's changed massively, even in the short time that I've been here.
You have everything here. You don't have to go anywhere, you don't have to go to Melbourne to look after anything,
People were enticed to come to the region, helped by cheaper domestic flights, and by the end of 2018, there were international flights too.
Touchdown for Victoria's second international airport.
That same year, $500 million was earmarked for the Geelong City deal by the local, state and federal governments to revitalise the city and unlock the visitor potential of the Great Ocean Road nearby. They've been sprucing things up with new green spaces and laneways. Work is beginning on some of the big ticket items such as the Arts Precinct, as well as a new ferry terminal to improve visitor access from the Mornington Peninsula. There's also plans for a convention and exhibition centre precinct on the waterfront. The council has about 140 major projects valued at about $12 billion slated, underway or completed, such as residential and office buildings. And it includes the long-awaited fast rail to Melbourne, due for construction next year, that would shave off 15 minutes from the commute.
I'm really excited for that because I keep on travelling to places.
There's still major gaps, and one of the biggest one is this area. We do not have a dedicated inpatient drug and alcohol rehabilitation centre.
It's okay to say put $1 million here, $1 million there, but hang on a second, there's probably 10 places where you could divide the $1 million up and sort of help a lot of places.
Trent, let's start with you on this one. You were born, am I right, 1993?
92.
92. That's completely ridiculous, but there again, I'm just very old. So the first 20 years of your life in Geelong were very different. It was a very different town to the town it is today. Talk to me about that change.
Absolutely. So Geelong was very much, and still is, a regional city. It maintains many of the positive aspects of being in the country. It was a great place to grow up. You know, you're close to the beach, close to the environment, the Bellarine, the surf coast. Getting around town was very easy, getting to your school, visiting your friends from school after hours. Everything was very touchable. That's been a major thing with Geelong. It sells its point as a very livable city. But we've recently had, such incredible growth and expansion, and the data which came out of the Australian Bureau of Statistics just a couple of weeks ago shows that Geelong over the last 10 years has grown 26% population-wise, which makes it the fastest growing city or town in Australia as a whole, which are incredible numbers. So from the time I graduated school in 2010 to now, the city has gone more than a quarter in size and growth. And that is mostly on the backs of residential growth. We've grown outwards. For a long time, the Bellarine was a growth hub. Post that, we've had the Armstrong Creek, Mount Dunedin areas, and now we're planning to put another 110,000 people in our northwestern growth areas. That's another city the size of Ballarat attached to the edge of Geelong. These are astounding numbers, and it really goes to show that such careful planning needs to go into this. From all levels of government, which is why we've had our amazing Geelong City deal.
That is an extraordinary deal, isn't it? I mean, that's one of those deals, city deals, that actually gets it right. It's got federal government, state government and your local council all working together to integrate the sort of development you're seeing to make it a more livable community. You've also got, and I looked up this figure here, so you have to bear with me so I can read it out, 142 major projects valued at $12.3 billion proposed, underway or recently completed in this Geelong area. And that includes $1 billion worth of residential building, which is extraordinary. I mean, do you have the people and the materials and all the rest of it to achieve that?
Yeah, well, we've been, quite frankly, we've been struggling like everybody else has. We've had such growth that even pre-COVID, when the markets were stable, we could have good access to services and facilities, and we were struggling to get tradies in, to get the manpower and women power in to create these areas. Now during COVID, it's a whole other ballpark. Trying to get with construction costs fluctuating, with primary product costs fluctuating, it's been incredible. But the amount of government investment has been sizable. It really has. But we work quite closely with developers, making sure we're getting developer contributions right into our new expanding suburbs, but also asset renewal and what makes our CBD great. How can we keep investing? How can we keep these areas alive? Because when you're going outwards, you've got to take all the precautions for that, but you can't forget the rest of these suburbs. Growth affects everybody, and infrastructure really needs to service the entire community, not just certain growth pockets.
Inala, you grew up in Port Fairy,
yes,
which is how far from here?
About 2 hours.
Okay.
Southwest.
Little country town, little coastal town.
Yes.
And Geelong was the big smoke?
It was until you get to Melbourne, yes.
And what was the story that you'd all jump in the car, and what was the exciting thing to do when you came into Geelong?
Well, this is in the 80s, Trent, so it was before there was a McDonald's in Warrnambool, but you'd stop at Geelong for Macca's. That was the exciting thing
about Geelong.
Yeah.
Barnacle bills.
Yeah, that was an exciting thing about Geelong and about the drive to Melbourne. But I think, as Trent's been, rightly pointing out, the need for appropriate development, and particularly when it comes to housing. From Geelong, you only have to go south an hour or 2 hours along the Great Ocean Road to places like Port Fairy and Anglesea or Apollo Bay and others, where there are still locals families who have perhaps been there for generations, where it's their community, that's where their roots are, that's what they know, that's their home. But because of recent changes, they're priced out of the private rental market.
And we will talk about housing in just a minute. But what I'm interested in is this massive development and this change to the area. So from the big smoke and the Golden Arches, I mean, this is a major change to the sort of place this is. You had a cousin who worked in the Ford factory.
Yes.
And when that closed, that must have seemed like the end of days.
Yeah, it did a bit. And you think about places like Torquay as well, where we used to spend family holidays in Torquay and Lorne. They're not the same places that they were in the 80s or the early and mid-90s. there's a certain quality that small country towns, particularly coastal towns, who rely on tourism income, there's a particular quality that they have which is different to regional cities or big cities. And maintaining that is really important. Listening to what locals want is really important when it comes to infrastructure, because there's a reason that people want to be in a quiet country town.
Yeah.
And if we no longer have quiet country towns anymore, or regional cities that operate sustainably, then we've got a problem.
Angela, can I come to you? I mean, they talk about the big build in Geelong, but there's a big build in Australia, $290 billion worth of projects that are concentrated in areas like Geelong, concentrated in Sydney, southeast Queensland and in Melbourne. There was some extraordinary statistic that said if you've got one mega project being built near you, there's about a 40% chance there'll be another mega project being built within 5 kilometres of your house. That's a lot of dust and dirt and disruption. Why are we doing all this building, and do we need it all?
Look, it's an interesting question. So we kind of, I think, went through a period, and as an economist, I have to say, I think we had something to do with this. We did these cost-benefit analysis, and everyone said, infrastructure is not something we should spend money on. And so there was sort of a dearth of projects through the 80s and 90s and even into the early 2000s where we didn't see this big infrastructure spending, particularly from state governments. Now, over that period, obviously, populations grew, and, we've seen huge increases in places like Geelong, but Melbourne itself has grown exponentially during that period without that infrastructure behind it to support that population growth. So in a way, we've played catch up, and what that means is, there's public transport infrastructure that's being built, which is really important, takes some of the cars off the road, but then also a lot of road development that's going on around the country. Now, are we at capacity? Look, probably pretty much, and a lot of these projects are running over time. They're certainly running over budget because the costs have gone up significantly, and really adding to that at the moment without a good economic case is only going to push those prices up further in terms of delivering and really risk, I guess, delivering what are the priority projects for us as a country at the moment.
Sarah, all the politicians know when they come to Corangamite or any other ultra-marginal seat that these are the frustrations of people who live there, and they want to throw money at you. How do you know when it's pork barrelling and it's nonsense, and how do you know when it's fair income?
I don't think you do anymore. Look, I did politics way back when I was in high school. It was a passion of mine, and I kind of lost that 2 years ago, just with COVID and the whole pandemic. And it's interesting in the sort of straw polls that I've done, the biggest thing around our area, if we go microeconomics, is the swimming pool that they want to put in.
Was it more than one? There seem to be a lot of swimming pools promised.
It's one. Is it? Well, two in a two-phase program.
Right.
There is a pool at Ocean Grove. It's 25 metres, not fit for purpose, not fit for the growth. They need something. There is the debate about 50-metre outdoor or indoor pool and what comes first or anything.
Did they build you a pool?
No, it's not there yet.
Right.
Sarah Henderson guaranteed $10 million, then she didn't get in. The Labor Party have guaranteed some money as well, but nothing's happened yet.
No pool?
No pool yet. No ground broken. They're still talking about, and both Stephanie Asher and Libby Coker in the last couple of weeks have put more money there, but nothing's happened. And they were saying that the pool's meant to be built by early 2023. Well, we're in nearly May in 2022 and there's no ground broken. And I think that's more, that is an example of, they can keep talking about it. Is it a federal issue? Is it a local government issue? Is it a state? What is it? But no one's getting there.
Does it work
delivering.
though? If people turn up with a fistful of dollars, and some journalists have been tracking...
No.
It doesn't?
I don't think it does down here. I don't think it does at all. I think because people are a bit sick and tired of not trusting what the politicians are saying. Especially around this pool thing. I think they've kind of shot themselves in the foot because last time round it was promised and it's still not here.
Yeah.
You know, and the people who remember, but then talk about people moving to the regions. Well, what if all those people who are new here don't know that and don't remember that? Are they bringing their their city views of local politics or how federal politics will affect them. And I think it also all gets mixed in together, local, state and federal. What is what? What is, like for us, if you talk about micro St Leonards, the roads, the overdevelopment, now I'm not anti-development, we need appropriate development. And there's a lot of non-appropriate development going on.
Just a quick one, just two quick questions. Trent, is there a point at which local government says, I don't want the money because I haven't got the funding for recurrent expenditure. You can give me a pool, but if I can't maintain the pool, etc., take your money and wander away.
There is a point that a lot of municipalities are reaching. For instance, pools were a major one in the 2019 federal election down here, and Surf Coast Shire had their very issue. They said, thanks for this $10-15 million for a pool, but we're not quite sure we can actually keep up with the recurrent funding of maintaining and keeping this facility open. Yeah. That's the debate they've had. I'm not privy to that one, it's a different municipality, but something we have to be aware of. Since amalgamation, council municipalities, the boundaries haven't really changed. And we're getting to a stage right now where even our own municipality, we have a $600 million annual budget. And hundreds of that, actually about 100 of that, goes in towards recurrent funding of, maintaining and renewal of assets. And when we have, on average, $100 million of developers giving us new assets for the estates each year, that bill goes up and up and up.
And final one on this, Angela. We live in inflationary times. Is there a risk with all this building that's both building in the private sector and building these mega projects in the public sector, that it becomes inflationary?
So I think I think high quality government spending is always important, and I would question whether the federal government spending money on swimming pools and changing rooms, especially when they say that social housing isn't in their remit, is really high value spending, or whether it belongs with local governments.
Yeah, but that's a judgment about whether you like the spending or not. My question is about when is it inflationary to be pouring money into overdue infrastructure?
So when's it inflationary? Well, if it's overdue, so if it's going to lift the productive capacity of your economy, then you'd say, look, it's probably worth those inflationary pressures in terms of, it's going to pay a benefit in the long term.
But if it's pork barrelling?
But if it's pork barrelling, well, that's where, your swimming pools or your other infrastructure that maybe is more in the pork barrelling type category, well, that is just going to be inflationary. And that's just going to mean all our building costs go up across the economy, and we add to those inflationary pressures, means higher interest rates down the path. So it really does come down to, is that high quality spending, which should always be a lens we put on this stuff, I think. But as particularly now, it gets a little bit more dangerous in terms of what the ramifications might be.
Well, the cost of living has become a key issue in this federal election, and being able to afford a roof over your head is right up there in terms of basic needs. Those trying to get on the property ladder are being pushed back by rising rents, and those out of the market altogether are sometimes needing to choose between paying the rent and putting food on the table. Well, the Victorian government is stepping in with a policy it believes will address both problems. The Drum's David Taylor takes a look.
Widespread insecure work, Buckley's chance of getting a pay rise, rock-bottom deposit rates and soaring property prices. It's tough going for first home buyers. But it gets worse. Rents are now rising sharply, up 2.6% in the 3 months to March, according to CoreLogic.
We are seeing that for renters, they didn't get the advantage of having a lower mortgage payment from lower interest rates during COVID. They didn't have the advantage of saving a lot of money by working from home. And so it is a point in time where rising inequality between renters and homeowners is probably at one of its worst points in recent history.
It may not be a silver bullet, but the Victorian government's aiming to ease at least this aspect of the housing affordability crisis. It's about reducing the cost of housing. It's offering families earning up to $132,000 the ability to rent homes from the government. 2,400 homes will be made available to rent in the state. Rent in Metro Melbourne will be at least 10% discount to the median or middle market rent and capped at 30% of the median Melbourne income. It'll be the same for regional Victoria, where rents are limited to 30% of the median Victorian income. 500 homes will be located in Ballarat, Bendigo and Greater Geelong.
It's what used to be public housing. So this was how the federal government and the state governments after World War II solved the housing crisis that emerged over the Great Depression and during World War II. And so really what the Victorian government are doing is going back to that original playbook of the Commonwealth State Housing Agreement in some ways.
The latest inquiry into housing affordability revealed home ownership rates among Australians under the age of 40 are at levels not seen since 1947. So the multi-million-dollar question is, will this Victorian government scheme work?
I do think it will work. I think at the moment the free market is broken when it comes to housing. In instances like this, we do need government to step in and to kind of set the benchmark for what is reasonable and what should be done in these sorts of markets.
Inala, you have something of a story of woe about your housing dilemma in Melbourne. What's happened?
Yeah, Ellen, and I do share this story with the acknowledgement that I'm in a pretty fortunate position. My husband and I were able to buy our first home about 4.5 years ago, and a lot of people aren't able to do that. But we sold our home at the beginning of this year in the hopes of having a bit more capital and being able to buy something a little bit bigger. And it's just extremely difficult to find something unless you've got sort of 1.6 to 1.9 million for a family home. We were at an auction last week. It was a post-war brick family house on a modest block, and it went for about 600,000 above anything that we could even get close to. We found out later from the agent that the successful bidders were adding to their portfolio and it would be rented out. So, look, we thought we'd be in a really strong position given, our income and our deposit, and I'm sure there's lots of other people who feel like I'm in a pretty good position, I should be able to buy a house. I think the income to cost ratio now is so large that it's getting absurd, and it's made even more difficult, I suppose, when we're told things like stop eating breakfast out on the weekend and there's food at home, and stop, buying new clothes and things like that. It's not that simple, because what has been created by the generations before us is a whole system of property for profit rather than the initial focus being on property for shelter and comfort. So we're continuing to rent, as many other people do, until who knows, Ellen, until either prices come down or by some miraculous thing we win Tats Lotto, or the bank says, sure, here, have another
$500,000.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
when did you move to the Bellarine? When did you move to St Leonard's?
About 6.5 years ago, yeah.
And describe what you paid then and what sea changes would pay now.
We paid $450,000 for a 1,000 square metre block. With a asbestos 1950s beach shack that had been, the owners had it for 25 years. It was their family home, and they made it really nice. They'd made it nice. We had real estate agent through last year, and from the prices just around us in the last couple of months, that you'd be looking at 1.4 to 1.5. We have improved it, but that is the size of the block, and that is what's happening in St Leonard's.
So it's tripled.
Oh, absolutely. Even we're astounded. Like, we had it valued probably 4 years ago, and it had gone up a couple of $100,000. So it's really in the last 3 years and in the last 2 years. And rents.
Tell me about the elderly couple. You were telling us a story about an elderly couple who are being squeezed out of their rental accommodation.
Yep, there's a couple in Drysdale. I see a lot of things on the local Facebook groups and the community groups, because being a business owner, I let people know about things and advertise on there. They've been in a property in Drysdale for something like 15 years. They're in their 70s. They knew it was up for sale, obviously. They went through that process with the owner. The owner had told them it was an investor buying it, but it's not. And so they have to move out, and they cannot find anywhere. 15 years of steady rental, and they can't find anywhere. And people are saying, well, have a look here, here's a house. And I'm like, a house in St Leonard's. But those houses are turning over in 2 or 3 days. And someone in our swimming group is trying to buy at the moment, and literally the house will be gone in a week. And she's looking at a big range. She's got a range. They'll do something up, although she'd prefer not to. And it's just ridiculous.
What do you think, Angela, of this notion of the Victorian government? It's a small scheme, 2,400 houses across the state, building in order to rent to people who, would be kind of middle-income people.
Yeah, look, I think it goes to the problem, right, which is we've sort of had, and you can think about it, well, shouldn't they just be focusing on social housing? And that is an area of critical importance that obviously the Victorian government is investing in. But then there's this other group of low-income earners who are seeing rents go up much faster than their incomes, and so they can't afford to keep renting. And it's causing, it means they can't live near their work. So particularly for nurses and teachers, for example, they can't live near their work, so we can't have the workforce. So look, it is a good idea, and it's a good idea, I think, to see government's role in housing as being broader than just, rent assistance, that there is actually a role for them in the provision of housing, because we've really seen that government...
Well, there used to be.
There did used to be.
And
if you look at any, internationally, there is still that involvement of government in the provision of housing. We see it in this country, I think, and it goes to your point, as about wealth generation. Like from an economic point of view, that's how we see it too often.
Getting ahead. This is how you get ahead.
That's how you get ahead, rather than it's something we consume. Obviously, we all need housing. It's one of the, along with food, it's probably the other essential we have. It takes up a huge part of our income, 30%. So for that market not to be working to provide people affordable places and secure places to live means there's a real problem. And that problem is that we see it as wealth generation rather than seeing it as this fundamental thing we all need to do. And actually, a market that delivers us all affordable housing will benefit all of us, in the short term and the long term.
Trent, you're trying to get your foot on your R.M. Williams boot on the housing ladder. Wow, and up the prices go. Would you have any interest in just renting? I mean, that's a big cultural change in Australia, just rent.
Yeah, absolutely, and we find that more common as an attitude overseas than we do in Australia. Everyone's very much property focused, as we've discussed. That's the part of the quintessential Australian dream. Get your house, get your white picket fence.
Is it your dream?
Go from there. Well, absolutely. So it's interesting because my partner and I were in our mid to late 20s. I've worked in real estate previously. I live on the Ballerina, as with Sarah. And although we see today that the government has increased the first home buyers loan scheme up to $800,000 in our region, that's market entry. That's the bottom market entry for our area. And when those properties are on the market, they're gone in a couple of days. So although these things keep going up and the government keeps talking about it, places like Geelong and the flow-on effects it has, if property prices keep going up and wages don't increase to sort of match to any extent, we're looking at things which a lot of people my age and a lot of people who are actually middle-aged and are selling homes or coming out of divorces, they can't afford to buy back into the market. In the Ballerina, we're seeing 1 in 5 women over the age of 50, single women, living in financial poverty in our areas, and we live in what is a fantastic part of the world with great investment, and we're still seeing these results. So a lot of work needs to be done.
You're watching The Drum. With me on the panel tonight, lead economist at Impact Economics and Policy and former senior Labor staffer Angela Jackson, Deputy Mayor of the City of Greater Geelong Council and Liberal Party member Trent Sullivan, Director of Murrup Barrack, Melbourne Institute for Indigenous Development Inala Cooper, and owner of Bellarine Smokehouse, Sarah Fenton. Bill Shorten had Labor's big announcement today on the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the NDIS. He claims the coalition has been engaging in an undeclared war on recipients, and rising costs are due to poor administration and legal red tape. Instead, he says Labor will restore trust by building a conciliation process to reduce reliance on the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, focusing on initial packages and training the necessary workforce. But it's an announcement more in the tone than in the specifics.
The NDIS, under the current coalition Morrison government, has been engaging in an undeclared war, cutting literally thousands and thousands of participants' plans. Kids with autism are not getting the early intervention support they deserve. People with mental illness, serious mental illness, are not getting the support they deserve. We don't need any extra money. What we'll do is stop the expensive carpetbagging consultants, the top end of town lawyers, growing rich on being paid taxpayer money to stop people getting their wheelchairs or home shower modifications or early childhood intervention for kids with autism.
Scott Morrison has committed to funding the scheme in full, but warned last year that it needed to be made fairer and more sustainable over the long term. Earlier today, Sonia Dainton and her son Joseph spoke to the Drum's Stephanie Bolchi about the impact cuts have had to his support.
Wanted to just do a change of circumstances. I had mummy got sick, didn't she? Yeah, all the time. So I did the usual, put all the stuff through. I was quite confident actually that she would do Joe's funding, roughly sort of the same as the last couple of years. So I checked on the portal and I thought it might have been a misprint. But yeah, they cut all your core funding, didn't they? Yeah. Yeah. I put a review and I had to ring up and find out about it because I've never had to do it. So they said we do a review of a reviewable decision. Now that made me laugh, that one. But so we put that in, that was denied. Then I rang up and they said I had to do an internal review of the reviewable decision. Okay, did that got denied. So then I rang up and I'm like, what do I do now? And they said, well, you've got to go to the AAT tribunal. And I'm like, what's that? So I've had to do that, and that's a lot of paperwork because of Joseph's losing his funding. His mental health deteriorated. So we had to employ a psych to help him, help me as well with some strategies. Yeah, I didn't get to the fund planning. Yeah. And how did you feel about that? A little bit worried. I can't go out anymore. Who takes you out? Leanne. If there's no money, Leanne can't come over, can she? Yeah. And you'd miss Leanne. Hey. I miss Leanne so much. She encourages him. Joseph never used to like going out or anything, did you? Yeah. And you were just doing wonderful, hey? Yeah. I suppose we're just devastated. I know my health's not part of it, sort of, but it is. So I've had to do all this. We've got the first foreign conciliation meeting, I think they call it, on the 27th of April, where I'm hoping we can come to some sort of agreement. But if we have to, I guess we'll take it right through. But then I have to get a lawyer. And I'm wondering how much money are they spending on all these lawyers when all we were asking for, I think it's about $10,000 or something like that for a year. So it'll be $20,000 over the 2 years. I think they would have spent that on lawyers already, denying it.
Dr. Jackson, let's start with you. You did your PhD in health economics, and the specialisation was the NDIS. Exactly. So what's interesting to me is, as Shorten was saying, it's not about the money. Both the Coalition and Labor intend to be spending by about 2026 $45 billion a year on the NDIS. And Labor is saying that the only issue with the scheme that's causing all this distress is incompetent administration.
Yeah, well, look, so that's exactly the case. So
Do you think it is?
Well, no, not that's your characterisation of the situation in terms of, both sides are saying they're going to spend the same amount of money. Yeah. But what we are seeing is increasingly, we've seen costs go up a lot faster than the government was anticipating, right? And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is more people were eligible for the NDIS than they thought. And the second thing, which I think the government is trying to address through one means, and potentially they could address through another means, is that people are now spending more of their packages. So in the past, people were spending only a small percentage of their packages, and they expected that to go up over time as people got used to the scheme, more services came online.
And more workers were available.
More workers,
people
that's
would get the money and then they couldn't spend it.
Exactly. Now, that's happened a lot faster pace. So they're seeing costs go up. Now, the way the government's responded to this, I think, is interesting. So what they've tended to do is, rather than say, well, what's happening with providers in this market? Have we got this set up right? Are the incentives right? They have focused predominantly on participants. And so we have seen them cut back on the size of packages across the board. Now, you know, there are always going to be cases where things change and the size of packages might need to change, but there is probably a question mark about whether there does need to be a broader focus about the market itself that's being created, about who is actually participating in that market, like who are these providers, are they providing high quality services, and have we set up the market properly or not, rather than cutting back on people's packages, which then directly leads to obviously their supports, what they can do in terms of functioning in society.
So how did we end up with Shorten saying there's an undeclared war on participants and that the government has spent $31 million in an appeals tribunal over recent months fighting off claims for additional support?
Look, I think it's difficult. Like, that's obviously quite emotive language. Like, a war on participants is very emotive. I think in terms of my interactions with the NDIA, there are a lot of very good people, but there is a sense of a culture that potentially participants or sometimes people with a disability are maybe, you know, trying to try it on and get more than they deserve, rather than, I think, that culture of we're here to support people with a disability. I think that's probably a fair criticism, and I think it's something that we do need to look at changing in terms of what's the culture of the NDIA, what is it actually there for? In the end of the day, these are people with a disability, they're their families and carers. Of course, people are going to try and get the most supports they can because it makes such a transformative difference into people's lives. But they're not out to, you know, cheat the system here. And in the most part, the participants in particular, you know, they're very good people. These families have gone through some tough days and tough times and really are just looking for that basic level of support so that their loved one can have a better quality of life. And so we do need that approach. On the flip side, I do think we need to have a really careful think about the providers and what's going on there. We do need to make sure the market's set up and that the incentives are there for quality and to provide high quality. And at the moment, as with every quasi-market in this country, unfortunately, we tend to not have those incentives set up right. That leads to higher costs, lower quality, and, you know, no one really wins out of that situation.
And you really hear horror stories around some providers. The most obvious one being the death of the young woman in Adelaide.
Yeah, that's right. You really do.
NDIS.
And these are really vulnerable populations, and I think some really careful considerations about how you have competition in this market when you do have that huge power imbalance between a provider and the participant. We really need to have a close look at it, and hopefully the Productivity Commission, whether it's the next year or this year, can really have a close look at this, because I think across the board in Australia, these quasi-markets are not delivering for taxpayers, are not delivering for users, and, you know, whether it's aged care and the Maseratis and all those things, it's just delivering profits and not necessarily high quality care.
And Inala, there's an interesting word that Angela's just used there about power. This was never supposed to be a welfare scheme, let alone what it's been characterised today as a second-class welfare scheme. It was supposed to be a scheme that came out of the Productivity Commission about ensuring that carers could go back to their substantial jobs and that people with a disability could live productive, fulfilling, dignified lives.
Yes, indeed.
And one of the key criticisms about where you see the difference is who's making the decisions. Whether there are enough people with lived experience on the board and in the executive.
People with lived experience combined with the culture of an organisation equals how it works and how things are delivered.
But there's something about power in that, isn't that? About handing over to the recipient with a cultural view, perhaps in government more broadly, that they're going to try it on, they're going to try and get as much as they can. Handing over power to that person to say, what do you need? And trusting that the answer will be an honourable answer, that there's a genuine answer.
Yes, and if that is indeed the case, where it's a misuse of power, where you hold the money and you're making the decisions as to whether or not a participant deserves it, is attitudes like that are outdated and offensive and discriminatory, because, as you said, any folks who are participating in the NDIS deserve to live their lives with dignity and freedom, And people who are working to deliver the scheme, we have to have people at all levels with lived experience, because it undoubtedly makes a difference in the decision making.
And are there parallels in Indigenous affairs?
Absolutely. In community-controlled health organisations, you know, we know that mob know how to look after mob. And if governments were prepared to, you know, relinquish some of the power that is, you know, put upon us by diverting more public health funds directly to Indigenous community-controlled health organisations, we'll have better outcomes.
Sarah, this is a huge scheme. And I wonder to what extent Labor is using this policy platform to sort of restate how they would like to be seen as a potential government. Good economic managers, Shorten says, there's enough money in the scheme. Competent administrators, you know, we've got to get the red tape out, got to stop spending the money on expensive consultants, carpetbag as he called them. And conversely, trying to suggest that the coalition is somehow mean in how it treats people, this undeclared war on participants. Why should you need a lawyer to access therapy? Do you think that that sort of messaging cuts through?
It's interesting because Geelong's now an NDIS town and it's become an insurance town. I think sometimes, and you know, I'm not as educated as other people here, but I don't know whether I like the term participant for someone using that. They're a customer. And I think it's sometimes the language that is used. And then if there are those attitudes, I have friends who are in that scheme and had funding for wheelchairs cut to ridiculous amounts. He needs a very active wheelchair to travel. And he is, you know, he was part of this scheme. He laughs at that scheme. And he's in a position economically to be more able to do things. I think if we're talking to the people that I've been talking, and even my own opinion is, it's like it has turned into a welfare, like there is an attitude from Centrelink or anywhere else of people trying to access things and not being able to access them when they really need them. I mean, I can't imagine being a parent who knows that they're coming to their end of their life and they've got a child who needs to be cared for in that system when they're not there, and imagine what's going on, or when they're losing funding, when they're saying their circumstances have changed. Like, it's just, I can't imagine being in that scheme and thinking it's working properly. And we've got friends who use it and it doesn't work for them and hasn't worked.
And do you think it provides any kind of cut through? I mean, that's obviously, that rather looks to be the strategy here. We're spending the same amount of money, Labor will be more competent, Labor will be more hands-out, and you could apply the same to this is the message, that you apply the same to Medicare, to aged care, to service delivery.
Yep.
Is that a message Australians will hear about Labor, understand? Will that message resonate, or something, or they'll hear something else?
For me personally, again, they're both very similar at the moment, and that trust level. So does it resonate that they might... I think maybe if you've been a staunch Liberal voter or a staunch Labor voter, it may cut through. But if you're in the middle where you're a swinging voter, I don't think it means anything. I really don't, because they're both saying they're going to spend the money, they're just going to spend it differently, one's better than the other. The point, you know, Julia Gillard put this system in and she got it through a hung parliament and she got it in, and that was meant to be her legacy, and it's been taken over by consultancy firms and people who don't have the lived experience of that system or family members or anyone that is in that system. And I think it's been set up as a bureaucracy gone wrong. That's just my personal opinion.
And can I just add, Ellen, in terms of lived experience and having people who do live with disabilities working to deliver the scheme, it's not enough just to put an ad out online and say, well, we put an ad out, no one applied. You have to have a proactive recruitment strategy to ensure that you have people with lived experience and a diversity of lived experience with disability, which I don't, in schemes like that. It takes work.
Trent, how do you see the issue finally?
Well, it's such a widespreading issue. Everything that Sarah has said is very, very relevant. But it's not even from the consumer end, so to speak. Even the providers of the services are having a difficult time. My partner and her mother they own and operate a business where they do animal therapy and equine therapy for children on the NDIS funding. And they have such difficulty with the middlemen companies in the middle there that look after the clients and will claim to look after clients, but are really just sort of in it for the for-profit sense, so to speak. And quite correct, this is an NDIS town, so to speak. The NDIA is one of the many government headquarters that we have here, and we're very proud to have it here. We advocated very fiercely for it because they do great work, and we want it to be a long-standing, sustainable service for all Australians. And it's so important to many aspects, not only just local employment, but our local community as well. But there's so many things that do need to be hashed out, and sometimes agencies like this can take 10, 20, 30 years to really find their feet, some people say. We're looking forward to that, but it does need support from both sides to get to that fruition.
Finally tonight, how good are small towns? Geelong used to be a small town. It's not anymore, as we've discussed, but it still has that old town vibe. But a lovely story in The Guardian today highlighted the advantages of small towns. The story involves a journo working at a local paper in Gilgandra, a case of identity theft, and the local postie who uncovered the fraud. The Drum spoke to Emily Middleton from the Gilgandra Weekly about the attempted scam and why it's useful to know your neighbours.
I came to work as I usually do on a Monday, and the local postie had been to deliver a parcel that was addressed to me, Emily Middleton, but not to where I live and not to my work address either. And basically the postie's come in, said, this looks a bit fishy. This doesn't seem right that Emily's trying to deliver a parcel to this other address, because he knew that I had no association with the other address. And I opened it and it was an iPad. And I was like, well, I haven't bought an iPad. I haven't won an iPad. Lots of things. Like, I was very confused. Basically, we spent a long time on the phone to the teleco company, and they basically explained that an account had been set up in my name. My family eventually got onto them, and I am sending the package back, and they have reported it as fraud. Our local postie, he's amazing. He knows where everyone lives. He knows who everyone is because he delivers daily. So if it wasn't for him, it wouldn't have been stopped. And it just made me feel really cared about in a little community. I've actually only been here for over a year now, and I felt connected. I felt like I was part of this larger community, this larger family, that we all kind of look out for each other.
Now Inala, Port Fairy. What was wonderful about growing up in Port Fairy, a small town?
Well, everyone knows everyone, Ellen. And as a kid, there's a great sense of safety and security when everyone knows everyone. There were definitely times, though, as a teenager, that I wished I was in the glamorous lights of Melbourne. But one of I think the most valuable thing for me growing up in a small town where everyone does know everyone is when you grow up and move away. And now, 35, 40 years later, still reconnecting with Port Fairy people, that's one of the most valuable things, I think, about growing up in a small town, because I'll always be a Port Fairy girl. And but even thinking about today's show and, messaging some friends over Easter and just, phoning a few people to ask, what are your priorities down at home with the election coming up, that continued connection that we have is really beautiful, as well as the folk festival.
Yes, of course. And interesting, you use the same term, safety, that you do have a greater sense of safety.
Yeah, well, if you're at the footy and you get lost, someone will find you and point you where mum is, or if you're down at the surf club and, you get dumped by a wave and you're 50 metres down from where you started, someone will, take you back. So, yeah, I definitely experienced safety and security as growing up in a small town.
And if you're from Tasmania, you're always from Tasmania.
Tasmania, correct.
The whole island's a small town.
The whole island is a small town, and I'm 7th generation, so I'm pretty much related to the whole island as well. So it's all family. Look, I think growing up in a small community, it has its benefits that everyone knows you, but that's also a negative, and it's probably one of the reasons a lot of people end up moving
on
away.
the mainland.
On the mainland,
yes.
Moving to the mainland, exactly. But yeah, look, it is, it's fantastic, I think. But we all live in these communities. I was thinking about this in terms of, the postie. Would that that have happened to me now. And to be honest with you, the amount of online shopping I do, I reckon my postie would know. Even though I live in Melbourne these days, he'd be all over it.
What about you, Trent? You grew up dinking friends on bikes up and down the hill and all the rest of it in Geelong?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. As I say, Geelong is still very much a regional town, and it is now a regional city. But it's not only just the town itself. It's made up of all these other, satellite towns. Port Arlington, St Leonards, Abersham Grove, Barwon Heads. And there's still beautiful places to visit. That's why we've had such population growth. But that sense of community, and since community is not a one-fit-all box, it's wherever you're from, that is how your community operates, and that's what you love about it. And that's why I believe so many people from my age, they had to do the thing, move up to the lights of Melbourne. But everyone's coming back to start their families. And then that's what really strikes home, which is what makes our area so great and what's so fantastic about regional Victoria.
Now, I've left the best to last, maybe, because I get to swear. So are you a salty bitch?
Absolutely. Absolutely through and through.
Now, the Salty Bitches are an ocean swimming group.
Yep.
And what does that tell us about the sense of community on the Bellarine?
It's grown from necessity from me to me just saying to women that I knew, I'm going to have to go swimming. I want to come. And we've now got nearly 700 members on Facebook. The difference we're making to people's lives, because we all felt it, the first 6 of us, was the mental health benefits. And so what I was also going to say, that small town is you build a community around people. We've been accepted as business owners into the Bellarine, but by also getting to know people. There's none of this locals and blow-ins. We are still blow-ins after 7 years, but you have to be about 20 years. But it is just building that sense of community. And I'm really proud of how the Salty Bitches have impacted people's lives. And I see it. It doesn't matter who you are back in the world. Once you're in the water, you're basically naked in your bathers. We have no idea what each other look like. We got dressed up and went for drinks at a local winery the other day at Bennett's and went, oh, is that what you look like with clothes on? I didn't recognise you without your snorkel or your cap. But I see the difference it's making. And once I get the business further going, part of those profits, 10% or $1 from each, I haven't worked out which, will go to mental health charity, because we all know how much it's impacted us. And I think maybe we could get that community in a larger city, but in that small town we've connected really well with social media, really, and just word of mouth and people finding us.
I find it extraordinary as a Queenslander. It's very cold.
So it's about 15 to 17 degrees in the water at the moment. It was 21 up until recently.
Oh.
There's climate change in action. There were jellyfish everywhere. We were getting stung. I don't swim in a wetsuit. I swim. And I also, when I'm doing longer swims, my bathers become sea anchors, so they get rolled down.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're in the all together. It's
Yep.
15 degrees. There's a whole bunch of jellyfish, and you're telling me this is what is good.
Yep.
About living in a city.
Yeah, you've got to try it. And look, St Leonards, we're famous for being the town where sea change was made.
Yeah.
So we're a little bit famous already.
Yes.
Yeah.
It does sound wonderful, although I could live without the jellyfish. Thank you all for coming in to the Geelong Heritage Centre and Library. It's been so lovely to see you all face to face. That's all we have time for. A big thanks to our panel, to Angela Jackson, Trent Sullivan, Inala Cooper and Sarah Fenton. Have a great evening. Jules is in tomorrow. Good night to you.